Kimathi, the shilling is not too strong right now, but not too weak either. What do you make of where the currency is headed?
A very good afternoon to you, Larry. Well, the shilling, yes, has seen some weakening, but thinking about it on a longer-term play, quite a number of analysts and commentators, and actually the general market expectation had been that the 82 to 83 level against the dollar was a bit, on the shilling was a bit too strong. So there's much more comfort for the general market, especially at the 85.50 level. But the central bank is probably not too happy about this. So those concerns about inflation again beginning to come up into the market, and everybody wondering what the central bank is, what kind of moves are going to come up in terms of the monetary policy. We saw last week that the central bank actually decided to bring in some new monetary measurement instruments. So all in all, it's an issue of really what is the real fair value of the shilling, and is it sustainable over a long period of time?
But you're saying right now is that the shilling is likely to stay where it is for at least a few weeks, a few days?
Yes, I do think that at this level of 85.50 or thereabout, the shilling ought to be stable at this level.
Let's talk about the Nairobi Securities Exchange closing up for the second straight day. What are the highlights of activity for you?
Well, today the big market mover was Safaricom, though I don't usually like to read too much into Safaricom's moves because of the sheer amount of volume in flotation.
Typically, so though, today the volumes on Safaricom were not too much, just over 6 million shares traded. It was still the most active counter, but Safaricom usually does 30-40 million shares.
That's precisely my point, that because of the huge number of shares out there on Safaricom, it very often is quoted as being the day's market mover. And I many times feel that we should actually look at this in terms of our percentage, looking at exactly how many shares are listed and how many of those are moving, and not looking at the direct volume trade per se. But Safaricom aside, we've seen big moves today on some tea companies, Kapchoria and Limuru Tea. We've also seen quite some moves on Crown Baja. And all in all, the value players still are looking for value on the NSE, the equities portion, with those interest rates edging slightly lower and beginning to stabilize. So all in all, the equity play is where the market as a whole is looking into.
Let me stay on that for a second. Limuru Tea and Kapchoro Tea are actually the two biggest gainers out of the market today. Usually you don't see too much activity from these tea stocks, and there's a prediction that the weather is going to be good, there's going to be rains, and therefore investors appear to like this.
That's quite right. Over the year, we've been pretty fortunate in comparison to last year's weather patterns. So the tea players, the agricultural players as a whole, seem to be in better footing as opposed to last year's. Now, two quick issues about those particular stocks: that they are generally illiquid is one thing, and also now to also look into the shillings losing ground. That is also another thing that plays very well for these particular tea stocks. So with those issues considered, it is not surprising that this market would really weigh heavily and very positively on the illiquid tea stocks.
Let's talk about the usual blue chip banking stocks. NIC Bank moving regionally, CFC into South Sudan, Equity Bank thinking of Somalia. What are investors thinking of all these developments?
Oh, yes, that actually is quite an interesting story. And my take on it is to go back to the beginning of the banking and industrial sector, the banking and insurance sector play into the rest of the region, is actually to take a step back and see exactly where it began. And that is in 2007, 2008, when the country was relatively unstable. The market was faced with a profound geographic risk, in that everybody looking onto the NSE would see that only very few companies were actually geographically spread. So when things took a downward turn in Kenya, the next corporate move was for everybody to look for some firm footing in the neighbors. And this is exactly what we've seen over the past 4 or 5 years. And for some, it's a belated move, a belated realization that they really need to get out there into Southern Sudan, into Uganda, into Tanzania, and throughout the East African region, if not to look further afield. Now, for Equity Bank, who are the latest players to come out and say that they are moving further afield into the market, Somalia is a very, very interesting play. And in terms not only of the relative instability of the country, but also for the risk that, of course, one would want to have in mind as Equity Bank moves towards that region.